Albert Johnson, known later as the Mad Trapper of Rat River, emerged in the early 1930s as one of the most mysterious and notorious fugitives in Canadian history. The events unfolded in the vast, rugged, and unforgiving wilderness of the Northwest Territories and Yukon in northern Canada, in the dead of winter. This is a true story of one of the largest manhunts in Canadian history. A man by the alias Albert Johnson reached Fort McPherson, Northwest Territories from the Peel River around July 9, 1931. On July 21st, he was questioned by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police's Constable Millen about his activities in the area, but he revealed little. Millen noted a possible Scandinavian accent, a clean-shaven appearance, and ample funds for supplies. Using a raft, Johnson reached the Mackenzie River Delta, where he built an 8-foot by 10-foot cabin on the banks of the Rat River. Despite living in the bush, he lacked a trapping license, which was very unusual. During this time, there was an influx of outsiders fleeing the Great Depression into these traditional Indigenous trapping areas. On December 25th, local Indigenous trappers reported to the Aklavik RCMP that Johnson was tampering with their trap lines. On December 26th, Constable Alfred King and Special Constable Joe Bernard, both experienced in the north, traveled to Johnson's cabin to ask him about the allegations. On December 28th, seeing smoke from the chimney, they approached the cabin to talk, but Johnson ignored them and never spoke a single word. When King peered into the window, Johnson covered it. At this point, the constables returned to Aklavik to secure a search warrant. On December 31st, King and Bernard, accompanied by 2 others, returned and confronted Johnson, but Johnson still refused to talk. The situation escalated when King attempted to enforce the warrant, leading to a gunshot through the door, injuring King. A brief firefight ensued, but they managed to bring the wounded King back to Aklavik, where he eventually recovered. This marked the beginning of a series of confrontations between Johnson and the authorities. A team was formed consisting of 9 men with sled dogs, including an Indigenous guide. On January 9th, they reached the cabin where Johnson drove back repeated attempts to storm the cabin. Most versions of events state they surrounded the cabin and used dynamite that blew off the roof and partially collapsed the cabin. The men tried to rush in, but Johnson, hidden in a 5-foot dugout beneath the ruins, fired shots and kept fighting. After a 15-hour standoff in -40 degrees Celsius, -40 degree Fahrenheit weather, the team retreated to Aklavik for help. The RCMP report differs with some of these details, suggesting the dynamite only slightly damaged the cabin, with it later being deliberately destroyed to prevent Johnson's return, which may have led to some thinking that the blast had destroyed it. A reinforced team, including up to 11 Indigenous trackers delayed by blizzard conditions, returned on January 14th to find Johnson gone. Pursuing, they cornered him on January 30th. In the ensuing firefight, Johnson fatally shot Constable Millen. Thinking they had him trapped, he escaped under the cover of darkness by climbing up a cliff. Once again, the team retreated. With Johnson trying to escape to the Yukon, the RCMP blocked the only 2 passes over the Richardson Mountains. This did not stop Johnson as he climbed a 7,000-foot, 2,100-meter peak and disappeared once more. Desperate in these harsh conditions, the RCMP requested First World War flying ace Wilfred Whop May to aid the hunt by scouting the area from the air. Arriving on February 5th using a ski-equipped Belanca monoplane, May discovered that Johnson had crossed the Richardson Mountains. On February 14th, footprints were spotted where the Bell and Eagle rivers joined. Johnson would walk in caribou tracks in the center of the river to hide his footprints, traveling quickly on compacted snow without using his snowshoes. He would also backtrack, leave blind trails, and use the terrain to his advantage at every opportunity. May's findings led the RCMP to pursue Johnson up the river, and by February 17th, they located him. The team caught up with Johnson as they rounded a bend in the Eagle River, just a few hundred yards ahead. He attempted to flee to the riverbank and a firefight ensued, with Johnson being fatally shot. Finally, the manhunt came to an end on February 17, 1932. One of the largest manhunts in Canadian history lasted 48 days and covered 240 kilometers or 150 miles in temperatures averaging -40 degrees Celsius or -40 degrees Fahrenheit in extremely rugged terrain. An examination of Johnson's body revealed over $2,000 in American and Canadian currency, as well as a small amount of gold that included pieces of dental work. No clue to his identification was found on him or in his cabin. There were also no matches to his fingerprints in Canada or the United States. The RCMP circulated post-mortem photos in Canada and the United States, but failed to uncover his true identity. There are various theories. The initial investigation into Albert Johnson's identity focused on Arthur Nelson. Details about Nelson were recorded by Yukon researcher and author Dick North. Nelson possibly traveled from Dease Lake, British Columbia, to the Yukon somewhere around 1927 to 1931, and he had similar firearms to Johnson. He trapped and prospected in the west central Yukon's Ross River region. In North's 1989 book Trackdown, he put forward his theory that Albert Johnson, Arthur Nelson, and a North Dakota criminal named John Johnson were the same person. John Johnson had a criminal history documented in San Quentin Prison and Folsom Prison with a physical description resembling Albert Johnson's. North traced John Johnson's origins to Norway, where he was born Johan Conrad Johnson in 1898. Despite similarities, Albert's costly dental work didn't match the profile, and DNA tests with John Johnson's great-nephew disproved the idea. I found an interesting bit of information from one of North's other books, Mad Trapper of Rat River, a true story of Canada's biggest manhunt. Under Chapter 17, The Eccentric Carpenter from Anyox. This was a fascinating find, as I have never heard of this connection before. Having just recently explored the remote ghost town of Anyox, this was a surprise, that the Mad Trapper could have possibly worked in the town. One of the statements Albert Johnson made to Roy Buddle at Ross River was that he had once worked at the Anyox mine in northern British Columbia. North was able to find employment records from Anyox that he searched through to get possible leads. North also mentions that he wrote to Robert Peter Loudon, a man that once lived in Anyox that wrote the book The Town That Got Lost. Loudon gave the address of Ozzie Hutchings, who he credits as a source of much of the early history of Anyox. North asked Hutchings if any person matched the description of Johnson, and he remembers one man. A newly arrived carpenter in the spring of 1923 who was Norwegian. After working with the man for about a month, he mentioned the man planned to hunt and trap in the interior of British Columbia next winter. He quit his job in November and set out across the inlet to the Nass River and towards the interior. That was the last Hutchings saw of him. In the end, the leads never amounted to anything concrete. Looking through records of thousands of men that worked at the mine, and most were Scandinavian, was not very practical. Johnson's remains were exhumed and submitted for DNA analysis for the television documentary Hunt for the Mad Trapper, which aired in 2009. The examination revealed he was approximately 30 to 40 years old, had scoliosis, had undergone expensive dental work for the period, and he may have grown up in Scandinavia or the US Midwest. DNA comparisons were made with more than 24 families, but no close relatives were identified. The results put several claims and theories regarding Johnson's identity to rest. In 2021, Othram, an American corporation specializing in forensic genetic genealogy, joined the investigation. Analysis has determined his background is Swedish, and linking him to multiple descendants of Gustav Magnusson and Britta Svensdotter. So who was Albert Johnson? Johnson covered vast distances, skillfully navigating the rugged terrain. His stand against the police drew the attention of the media, who labeled him the Mad Trapper of Rat River. But was he even a trapper, or mad, or just provoked and forced into a situation that escalated badly? Did he really tamper with the trap lines, or was that just a way to try and chase him from the area? Although called upon to surrender many times, Johnson was never heard to say a single word. But it has been said the only thing they did hear was Johnson's laugh after he shot Constable Millen. To this day, people debate who he was. Was he possibly a fugitive on the run, or a man just looking to separate himself from society and live off the land and be left alone? His true identity remains a mystery.